is John Easy, and I'm talking to you today about the wicked problem of academic publishing. So why am I saying that it's a wicked problem? A wicked problem is one that's not only complex, but it lacks clarity with respect to its solutions or a way to scientifically study and test it. Typically, they have multiple stakeholders with conflicting interests, no solutions, please all the stakeholders, and with respect to academic publishing, the wicked problem transcends the academic requirements of journals and publishing, and that is rigor, independence, transparency, and reproducibility. So the world's first scientific journals started some hundreds of years ago. On the 5th of January 1665, the journal De Scavens appeared in Paris, and 3 months later, the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society appeared in London in March. And you can see right from the beginning that these journals were published by independent publishers. In this case, the Royal Society went to a publisher with manuscripts and asked them to publish it. So why is this such a successful model? Why do we still have these journals? Scientific journals or journal in any discipline record, disseminate the findings of the academics. They record primacy, that is, they record who said what first. They also act as a filter via peer review, and they archive these findings so that people in the future can build on the work, so-called standing on the shoulders of giants. And a picture of the first journal of the Royal Society, the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society, are still going today. So the tradition originally was that academic societies would use publishers as their printers and then as the means of dissemination. So this involved libraries who subscribe to the journals of the academic content. They pay a subscription for the printing, for actually receiving the printed copies. The author and society that run the journal and contribute to the journal, their costs are covered through these subscriptions, and any profits they're made go back into the societies. And this sort of four-actor model continued to work for hundreds of years of scientific publications. It didn't always work in the best possible manner, and at the time, at the end of the Second World War, there were musings, especially in the UK, about how UK academics didn't publish much. Their publications were quite low quality, and the actual published journals were particularly poorly published. Along came a figure of Robert Maxwell in the 1950s. He bought up a prominent UK academic publisher, and what he realized is that you could do without these societies. The time societies appeared to get in the way, there was a lot of academic bickering, and Maxwell realized that you could approach academics individually, ask them to be editors of journals, and set up a journal in a new field or in a parallel field to one that would existed through the publishers. This meant that now there was only a three-actor model: the author, the library, and the publisher, and any profits made during this process would go back to the publisher. The other important thing that Maxwell realized was that publishing science was not like publishing magazines or other forms of media, because you didn't have equivalent publications where science could look at one or the other. If there was a paper or set of papers in one publication that the scientists needed to look at, then the libraries would have to subscribe to both journals. So this model, this economic model, didn't work like other media, and it meant that when Maxwell set up new titles, the libraries would subscribe to those in addition to, not instead of, other journal titles. So what the work involved in producing a scientific paper into a journal? Well, in the academic society model, you have the author who writes the content, the editor. There was often an editorial assistant, and the peer review process. And all of these processes were paid for by the universities that employed these people, except for the editorial assistant that was often paid for by the society, together with postal costs, and then things like typesetting, printing and binding, distribution and collection of subscriptions were all covered by the publishers at the cost of the society. So these costs would come out of subscriptions that would be collected from the library. Well, in the publisher-owned model, this looks exactly the same, but this time the editorial assistant and postal costs covered by the publishers at very little cost. And that's a system pretty much as it was, in this case, from the 1950s all the way to the early 2000s. And then the digital era arrived. And this is the way that we sit with these models now. In the academic society model, we have author, editor, and peer review process all being paid for independently, and all that's really required is some typesetting and software for distribution, but these costs are minimal, and then the profits from these models are split between the publisher and the academic society. But obviously, in the publisher-owned model, all the costs, all the profits go directly to the publisher, and this is an extremely attractive model for private businesses to engage in and take over, and this is one of the reasons why we have seen academic journals being captured and being the focus of big business, because there's a huge amount of profit to be made in the realms in the region of 40% profit margin, which is, just to give you an idea, no other businesses make 40% profit margin. Is typically found in things like drugs gangs, prostitutions, and various other mafia cartels run at around this kind of level of profit. So academic publishing has become extremely attractive to businesses who want to make a lot of profit. Just how profitable, I hear you ask? Well, here are some figures. We have to remember that agreements between publishers and universities are entirely confidential and cannot be declared. But we know, for example, that the cost of subscribing to a journal in 2005 was about 29 cents an article if you subscribe to a scholarly journal, society journal. But if you subscribe to a for-profit journal, that went up by a staggering $1.42 per article. Global profit from science publishing was estimated at $9.4 billion in 2011, and of that, Elsevier alone were worth $1.1 billion profit. And just to make the point that this profit is very unlike other businesses, around 40%. Google's only sitting at about 11%, Amazon at 2%. And so you've got to understand that these businesses are making a massive profit from academic publishing. Now, throughout this presentation, I will always be referring to big publishers. And what do I mean by big publishers? Well, these are typically all publishers: Elsevier, Springer, Nature Springer, Taylor Francis, and Wiley. These four big publishers now publish together around 50% of academic publications. And from 1995, you can see how they have turned both social sciences and natural medical sciences from smaller publishers to big publishers. This data comes from Riviere et al. 2015. Now, the smaller publishers do still exist and still produce a lot of content. Not talking about these a lot in the presentation, but they typically are better ethically produced and cost a lot less than these big publishers. At the same time, as we have seen big publishers capturing so many journals and journal content, we also see a rise in the number of publications per year. In this diagram by Woolman and 2020, you can see the exponential growth rate of scientific and other publications, and this we'll know is a log scale here, and these are often extrapolated in many databases. This includes databases like Dimensions, Microsoft Academics, Web Science, and Scopus, and you can see that they all agree that there's this exponential increase. Currently, the doubling time for journals for academic literature is around 17.3 years. This means that in 2013-14, there were about half the number of publications per article. That's quite a rapid rate of increase. We might expect that this doubling time will decrease in years to come. So what is the worth of these different journal titles? Well, the Science Citation Index that was set up in 1964, and you can see that starting around here, indexed all publications at the time and their citations, and it saw increasing numbers of titles over the years, And librarians started asking about how they should choose between journals when the number of journals started going beyond their budgets. What about the impact factor? This simple index generated by Eugene Garfield basically takes the sum of number of citations for a particular year and divides it by the total number of publications for the previous 2 years summed together. Impact factor has been used as a way to judge the quality of work that academics produce. However, most academics agree that journal impact factor does not indicate quality. Moreover, there's a movement against using impact factor within academia, and this is known as the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, also known as DORA. Why is impact factor so important? Well, publishing in a very high impact factor can make your career. When I'm talking about very high impact factor, I'm talking about the top journals, things like Nature and Science and Cell. First author publication in one of these mean that you have a job for life. It can also put money in your pocket. So publishing in one of the top 25% journals, top 25 impact factors in your field, results in bonuses, particularly in China, but also in other parts of the world. It also will aid you in getting tenure, having promotions, and obtaining interviews for jobs. And this is what DORA is trying to back against these particular practices. Who calculates impact factor? Well, now, although impact factor was originally calculated by the Science Citation Index, which was a not-for-profit organization, it was bought out, and now it's owned by a company called Clarivate, and they calculate impact factor for the Web of Science. But other publishers have their own databases, such as Scopus or Elsevier, and they also publish impact factor. And we've known for a long time that impact factor is actually manipulated for commercial gain. So, for example, Nature manipulates its impact factor by excluding a lot of editorial content and having only the number of publishers. And in doing so, this reduces the size of the denominator so that it increases the impact factor for those publications. What's the interest in these commercial companies getting more higher impact factors for the journals? Well, it's not really just for their authors. Shown in this graph from a publication by Gray in 2020, we can see that there's a clear correlation between the impact factor and the cost of publishing in a journal. This is an extremely worrying correlation. It seems to be holding true. For example, Nature announced this year in 2021 that they would charge $9,500 for a publication in their journal. It's way up here. Higher impact factors are worth money to publishers. Real costs of publishing an article are estimated at about $400 US. So you can see that most of these companies are making large amounts of profit per article. Higher impact factor is also associated with the prestige of the editors of the journal. Those gatekeepers who are editors and editorial associates. So publishers often encourage and get buy-in from editors to increase the impact factor of their journal. Impact factor is closely linked to citations. The higher the journal impact factor that you publish your article in, the more it will likely get cited. Increasing the number of your citations will also relate to other metrics, such as your X index, your R index, I-10 index, and many more. If you're not aware of these, for example, the H index is a simple, simply calculated index that relates to an individual. You simply rank your publications by the number of times they've been cited, and you take the H index as the number of times the nth article has been cited n times. So, for example, in this figure here, we can see that the H index is 5 because there are 5 articles that have been cited 5 times or more. If we go down one, the 6th article has only been cited 5 times, so does not inflate the H index. However, citation is completely necessary. So we all know that it's important to build on the work that others have done before you, and for those of you who are familiar with Google Scholar, you'll see that slogan comes up every time you do a search, stand on shoulders of giants. And here's an example of the kinds of citations you may have. Any kinds of statement, such as this one, that the human populations are currently declining across the globe, is substantiated with citations that are listed at the end of the document. This is Vancouver style, and here we see Harvard style citations. Miscitations are also common in the literature. These occur when people put a citation that does not accord with the statement that's given. This is often because they copy citations from other papers, or they're choosing citations from high impact factor journals. These will then inflate the impact factor of journals that are cited. And there's also imbalance. So if you cite a publication that shows one thing, but misciting 5 others that show the opposite trend, this can lead to a culture of bad science where one particular view is put forward and leads to publication bias. Self-citations, also very common. These can inflate your personal metrics, like the H-index we just looked at. In many subjects, self-citations are actually surprisingly high. So, for example, in biological sciences, self-citations rank at around 30%. There are also coercive journal practices, editors or associate editors that force authors to cite something from that particular journal within a 2-year impact factor window. And citations are also linked with peer review. So citations that you write in your manuscript will give the reviewers an idea of your understanding of a particular topic. Obviously, imbalance or failure to cite the other side of an argument will lead reviewers to suggest that you add citations. And it's very common in a review that additional citations will be suggested, and it's up to the editors then to either choose to enforce the reviewer's suggestions or allow the authors to decide themselves. Peer review itself is problematic. There are multiple biases: gender, reputation, prestige bias, nationality and language biases. There's also confirmation bias, that is when only studies that accept the hypothesis published, not ones that dismiss it. There's also publication bias, so that is where studies confirming things that have been previously published, usually with confirmation bias, are more likely to be received positively by the editorial gatekeepers. Peer reviews regularly held up to be a gold standard in science and other forms of academia. However, reviewers are human, and studies on peer review have shown that it actually fails to find many faults in much of the literature. Instead, I suggest that peer review should not be thrown away, but actually held as a silver standard. It's extremely important in filtering out a lot of very poor literature, even though some accept that some slides through and is then cited. But it's actually extremely good, and it's quite high bar. The community ethics of peer review, the spirit of peer review, if you like, is actually a very positive experience. Most experienced authors will tell you that they take peer review very seriously because it's a way not only of helping authors, but of receiving help from the community in your publications. So I've mentioned gatekeepers. In terms of peer review, the editors are the gatekeepers. So a simple workflow of submission to a journal, the author submits their manuscript, the editors then choose who should do the peer review, and then once the peer review is done, editorial oversight decides how much of that peer review suggestions is incorporated into the revision the authors to revise. And then this process can loop back to the beginning once or even twice more during a peer review process. Who are the gatekeepers then? Well, at the top of this pyramid sits the editor, and under the editor sit associate editors. In many journals, this phase of the peer review process will be done by associate editors, with the editor-in-chief having final say at the end as to whether an article gets published or not. Behind the editor and associate editors sit an editorial board. The editorial board essentially decides, adjudicates fair play for the journal, and can decide, should vote on the editor and the composition of the editorial board. So if there are any problems that authors have with the system, the peer review and the choice, their ultimate appeal will go to the editorial board. Gatekeepers are a very important part of the whole publishing process. They are excellent in that they're independent. They're very rarely employed by any of the publishers. They work for institutions, so Stellenbosch University, for example, will employ many editors and associate editors. Their editorial work comes on top of other duties, which means if you are aware of academics, they're usually very busy people, they have a lot of work to do, and if they choose to be an editor or associate editor, that's extra work they need to do, often before work starts, in the morning, in the evenings, or at weekends. There are benefits that being a gatekeeper brings. So you're kept abreast of research that's happening in your field. There's a certain level of prestige associated with being a gatekeeper. You may receive perks like free copies, free access to some of the journal contents. There are also problems with gatekeepers. They tend to be overworked, and this can influence how well they make their decisions. Especially, it can lead to some biases and things that are rejected that shouldn't be rejected. They tend to form part of the establishment, so they tend to be more senior people, especially if it's a chief, and they hold orthodox views on a lot of academic systems. Importantly, there's a lack of diversity. So as we've seen, the number of publications is increasing. With that, the number of academics all over the world in different areas are starting to publish a lot more. So one example would be China, that is now rapidly increasing the number of publications that they are submitting to journals. However, very few editors are Chinese, and also few associate editors. And this lack of diversity can really have been shown to act against many of the submissions that authors make to journals. They're also geographically and linguistically biased. Again, this lack of diversity can impact how they make their decisions, and is more likely to lead to rejections, for example, if manuscript is poorly written. So this is where we are. We have our gatekeepers, the editorial board, associate editors, and editor, the center of our publishing influence. We know that they help determine impact factor, and impact factor itself is driven by the citations that go towards that journal, and also citations that are made within that journal. Lastly, we have peer review. Peer reviewers can influence what citations are made, and they also have some relationship with impact factor in that they are maybe more or less inclined to review journals based on their impact factor or perceived quality. However, this situation is not where we want to be. Where we want to be is to have this independent gatekeeper setup that we've already described, but instead of having the influence of the publishers around these gatekeepers, what we should have is their influence removed and replaced with open academia, so open data, open access, and open communication. So for the rest of this talk, I'm going to describe the ways in which we can actually improve our communication within academic societies in order to get where we want to be. So how do we remove the influence of the impact factor? Well, first of all, institutions should sign and abide by DORA. Metrics should no longer be used to influence hiring, tenure, or promotion. They should not influence any other research privileges at institutions, like in bigger laboratories or access to more resources. Secondly, researchers themselves need to stop supporting these top impact factor journals. They can stop submissions, they can stop reviews, and they can stop gatekeeping. Now, I'm well aware that this is going to be very difficult for researchers to do independently of institutions signing and abiding by DORA. In addition, this is especially difficult for early career researchers who are aware that publishing these top impact factor journals is important for starting or kickstarting their careers. However, there are alternatives, and the alternatives are extremely important, which is to remove impact factor and replace it with openness. So this is where institutions enable and incentivize transparency. Rigor at all levels of submissions. This is before submitting, for example, before submitting your manuscript, you've already submitted your intentions of what your research are, be they in the form of a research proposal or a grant proposal. In science, award can be based on repeatability, so that when 5 studies have repeated, independent studies have repeated your findings, this can lead to an award in an institution or through scholarly society. And gatekeepers and reviewers can concentrate on these aspects, the repeatability, transparency and openness, and have the independence from the influence by publishers. After all, these are all very clear, well-known academic values. Values of rigor, independence, transparency, and reproducibility lie at the heart of what we try to attain in science. And we can do this through providing our data, not only our data, but the way in which we analyze the data to get our results. We can provide open access to all of this data and the code and what we've written, and we can have open communication. That is, we can openly publish reviewer comments and any other comments that occur around publication. And of course, we don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater. We need to keep our independent gatekeepers, our editor, associate editors, and editorial board. So we need to transform the way that we deal with big publishers, and especially those big publishers who clash with our academic values. So let's start the conversation by talking about open access. So as many of you will be familiar, this is the paywall. These boxes are approximately to scale, but not to scale. Hiding in the shadow of the paywall is the vast majority of academic publications, and in front of it are the various different grades of open access. Diamond open access is the one that we aspire to. Diamond open access is where the authors do not pay and there's no charge given to read the content. Both gold and hybrid open access, the authors or the institutions need to pay either directly per article through a transformative agreement. Bronze open access is often time limited, so after your publication has been published for 2 or 5 years, it becomes open access, or could be through some other journal agreement. Green open access is where you deposit your manuscript that's accepted but not formatted onto your institutional repository, which I hope you all do. Gray open access is where you deposit manuscripts into kind of academic social media sites such as ResearchGate or Academia Edu. And then there's black open access. These are platforms like Sci-Hub that have taken the content of journals online and made them open access to everybody, but without the agreement of the publishers who consider this to be legal. This graph from a publication by Hua, it's out in 2018, shows you the actual numbers of publications and the way that they're distributed. So this closed grey box down here is actually the vast majority of publications over time, although this is now decreasing. But look here, Diamond open access isn't represented at all because in fact it makes up such a tiny proportion of open access journals that you would be able to see it in this breakdown. So what does this article processing charge or gold open access cost? Well, some of you will be aware of Plan S. This is the agreement by a group of mostly European research funders to force their recipients of their grants into making full and immediate open access of everything that they publish. This has forced the hand of many publishers to adhere to various demands that Plan S makes, and PLOS One, this is the Public Library of Science publication. This has been the biggest journal in the world at one point, probably still is, has been good to conceive the demands of Plan S and transparency in revealing how they spend the $1,595 that it cost in 2020 to publish one article PLOS One. Of all of these costs, only the price for services for acceptance to publication are real costs that it actually takes for the journal to get something online. So this is the formatting of the manuscript into a PDF that can be distributed online. All of the other costs we can question the need for. For example, $334 is the price from submission to desk reject or accept. So this is, for example, the management of the software through which you submit your submission, but you're also paying for all of the articles that the desk reject, so the articles that they consider are not up to the standards of PLOS One even before they go out to review. Okay, so this is a staff decision based on the fact that PLOS One is such a huge publishing organization. It takes staff constantly to man their desks and to reject a large number of articles that are submitted. And this costs the people who eventually do submit with PLOS One. Other costs like the price of author and customer support and the price of sales and marketing, we can really question whether these are actually needed for academic articles in a world where we are not interested in any impact factor. So this leaves us with the standard that we actually assign to, that is environment and access. But what money is actually needed? So clearly we need money to host articles, we need money to archive these articles and make sure they don't disappear after any number of times, and we need to maintain this author submission software. And all of these costs are essentially ID costs that could be ascribed to an institution. Lastly, we need to format our publications. We all got used to very pretty looking publications that have been sold to us by publishers over the years, but as any of you who have read manuscripts without any formatting will realize we don't actually need this formatting process. And what we find is that we can actually do it ourselves for next to nothing. Who should pay? Well, clearly someone's going to pay for all of this kind of hosting of these articles and their services. There are actually facilities who currently do this. So all of your green open access articles, these are housed by your academic institution, most probably by your library service, who already host a large number of things you publish, manuscripts, other content that you publish, all hosted by your library service anyway. So why should we pay a publisher to do it again? And lastly, I would maintain that all authors probably format their own submissions for publication and don't need to pay this exorbitant fee to any publisher. And that brings me to overlay journals. So this is what I would suggest to you is the solution to our publishing problem, or certainly actually waving away these big publishers who conflict with our academic principles. Overlay journals are hosted on an overlay website. Their content is actually held on the preprint server. So here's an overlay website. This one is discrete analysis. You can gain access to all of the contents of this journal through the website, but the actual papers themselves are hosted on a preprint server. Like this one, this is archive, preprint server archive. On this server, you can see the various review versions of this paper, and the final one you can download here, as well as any of the previous ones, and this could include reviews of the article in addition to any comments that anyone wishes to openly post there. So by using an overlay website and a preprint server, this doesn't have to be archive or any other big server, it could be your own institution server, but by openly posting the original submission and any reviews or open comment on this publication, we've met most of our needs for an open academic system. Finally, the final version, in this case, is formatted by authors themselves using LaTeX. So this is an example of a paper that is being produced in discrete analysis. The authors produced the final version using open source software that went into LaTeX. They downloaded the LaTeX style file that would produce this final document, and when it was accepted, the editors of discrete analysis gave them the final page numbers or acceptance number for this particular article. And so everything here was done at no cost to the editors or the academics authoring and editing for this journal discrete analysis. The only costs were borne actually hosting this website, this overlay website, which we know, very low costs, and the preprint server, in this case, Archive, which is funded by a number of philanthropists at Cornell University, but does not have to be this particular preprint server. It could be any preprint server. So we might expect that your own institution hosts your particular preprints and various versions and reviews and comments that happen on your paper. And so by moving from publishers to something like an overlay journal, we actually bring the costs of academic publishing back to the institution where the academics are housed or paid. And in this way, the institutions themselves become more responsible for their own academics and serving their own academics. Plus, this system forms a new meaning for libraries where they're not simply replicating and archiving in addition to what publishers are doing in case publishers start falling away. They're there instead of publishers. Overlay journals then meet all the requirements we need for an open academic system. At the heart of them sits the editor, as we've shown this is needed, surrounded by the associate editors and the editorial board. These are unchanged, but instead of these people being heavily influenced by the publishers through things such as impact factor, peer review and citations, and the toxic way in which these are formed together, we see in the open system how this meets academic requirements: rigor, transparency, reproducibility, and independence. Furthermore, these same funder requirements that are needed by Plan S and virtually all other emerging funders who are requiring open academic systems, they're also met by this system. There is no need for any publishers, let alone big publishers. We just don't need them. There are low or no costs to institutions. So for institutions who already have library services and mature and can host content, there's low costs and simply maintaining the costs that they already have in these IT systems. For institutions that have poor library facilities, there can be no costs because they can host them on public preprint servers, and there's no need for them actually to host manuscripts in-house. So this needs to be promoted. These overlay journals need to be promoted across all the disciplines. Societies need to transform. They need to come off the cash that has been given to them through big publishers and pull themselves away from that dependency. For-profit titles to be abandoned. We simply cannot maintain any for-profit titles. We must undo that work that was done by Robert Maxwell to capture academia. Early career researchers need to drive this transformation. So they need to be at the heart of research societies demanding change towards an overlay journal system. So in this talk, I hope I have persuaded you that we really need to move away from this captured system that's been captured by big publishing companies that overly influence editors, associate editors, and the editorial board through toxic things like impact factor and the influence that they have on citations of peer review. And instead, we need to move to an open system that we've all agreed is needed within academia. But what I really want to show you is that this is possible. You don't have to wait for some new technology to emerge. We can do this today, and we can do this based on systems that already exist. So, in this presentation, I constantly talk about the need to make this change. But what if we don't do it? What if we just allow big publishers to carry on as they are, and we pay these ever-increasing funds for publishing our academic articles? Will they stop at 3% of profits? Well, we're seeing the signs that they're going to stop. In fact, they want more. We risk what I term academic capture. Many of you will be familiar with state capture. This is where the organs of state are captured by private individuals for their own benefits. We saw that in South Africa quite prominently during the Zuma period. But we now risk academic capture. So we now risk publishers starting to make a move to capture our entire workflow. So this figure is taken from an article by Brez et al. It's available on Zenodo. And you can see in it that many organizations like Elsevier, Spring, that owns Springer Nature and Digital Science, Wiley, eTyphon, and Francis are actually been buying up many different pieces of software that make the academic workflow. This includes discovery, how we search for and find publications, analysis tools, writing tools. Look, here's overly something that I used to use until I found out who owns it now. Of course, publication probably goes without saying, but also outreach. So the next stage that we need in order to show that our publications are used by others, and the assessment tools, of course, are so important apparently to our institutions. Not only things like the new dimensions in its Scopus, but also things like altmetrics, that has now been captured by Hawthorne. Once they've captured this entire academic workflow, imagine the Cambridge Analytica scandal, but instead in academia. So they don't need to install spyware on our machines, because if we use these captured pieces of software, we will effectively be giving them data for them to use as they want. So when I say that our data will become their data cell, I'm not talking about your research data, although they may also capture that and give it them. I'm talking about the way in which you do your science, what you read, and the way in which you do your analysis. All of these things will be theirs and will be then available to any buyer. So there's all the evidence that the holding corporation of Elsevier is selling some of this captured data to US Customs Immigration, for example, presumably screening people who wish to immigrate into the United States. So thanks very much for your attention. It only leaves me to say that a lot of the content of this talk is available in this book, How to Publish in Biological Sciences, a guide for the uninitiated. It is published in a hard version as an ebook by CRC Press. It's owned by Taylor Francis, who are one of the big publishers. It is available to free online at www.howtopublishscience.org. So if you want to follow up on any of these or look at any of the references that I have used, please go along to howtopublishscience.org and have a look at the content there.